I came from a stable 2-parent household with a focus on education, instilling in us the values that allowed us to succeed.
And that was unusual in that school.
It was, I would say, it was a diverse range of people in that school. There were some very people came from great family backgrounds who also had the ability to succeed and do great things. But there were a lot of people who came from tough, challenged backgrounds, very different from my own. There was a history to that, annexation of different school districts that created the district that I was in. Now, looking back at that, I'm immensely grateful for that experience. Yeah. But I had a French teacher, Mr. Wagner, in 8th grade, who came to me and said, listen, you need to get out of here.
Really?
Yeah. He sat my parents down, and my parents weren't thinking about it. My dad was working at GE. He was working at GE in an era of layoffs under Jack Welch's tenure.
Yes.
There was different job security concerns. Their plan was not to send us to private school. But when a teacher sits down, me down and my parents down, and says, for the betterment of yourself and your kid, you need to get out of this school and go to a place where they can actually celebrate academic achievement and success. That's what led my Hindu parents to arrive at the conclusion, when they weren't planning to write a check, just write the check out of their savings to be able to send me to St. X High School, St. Xavier in Cincinnati. And to me, that was a totally different experience too, because I was one of the lone non-Catholic, lone Hindu student in a Catholic environment.
But you weren't at risk of being thrown down the stairs.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a great event.
Right.
You get up, you pick up, and you move on. But that was a wake-up call for us to say, and you know what? That kid probably, I mean, I don't know who it was, probably came from a tough background of their own. I mean, think about what a lot of students go through that put themselves in a tough position. That's what we're in this to change at the end of the day. And so I think we got to have empathy for people who come from tough circumstances. My parents did what was right for me, which was to go to St. X, which ended up being a great high school experience, and give us a great education in the process. But what I want to do is to say, we're not going to leave behind those kids in those public schools. Right? It's not that getting out isn't the only option. In fact, getting out should not be the only option.
But it has to be in that situation.
What we want to do, I mean, now you think about this beauty of this country and the state where I grew up. This is the country on God's green earth where that kid who grew up as the kid of immigrants who came to this country with nothing, went to a challenged public school environment, had rough experiences there, now has gone on to succeed at the highest levels of American business, ran for president, became the youngest person in history of the Republican Party to do it. And now, God willing, in a position to lead that same state where I was born and raised, and hopefully to change that state for the better by elevating the standards of those very public schools. That's what makes this country great.
It's a wonderful story.
And that's my gratitude. It's my sense of gratitude for that journey is what guides me in this mission.
And I guess that experience built resilience in you and an ability to bounce back. And your mother is a psychiatrist. Your dad was an engineer for GE. And they came here from India. Why did they do that? What were their circumstances like back home? And what do you think their experiences instilled in you as the American-born son of migrants?
Yeah, well, my dad was from a village in rural southern India, and it was not even, we had India in the cities, but this was rural. This is an area where they had rotating power outages on a regular basis, even when we would go back and visit my grandparents in the 1990s. My mom grew up in different cities around India, from Bombay to Mysore, where she went to medical school. And the one thing they had,
so there were
they
different
came here,
classes?
They were, one was a doctor, one was an engineer. And, but one was from the city, one was from rural.
So one was from a high-born family and one was from a...
I would say that's a little bit of a archaic and outdated. Right. Super. I mean, it's like the left talking about, like, you know, somebody grew up in a city versus in the suburb here. They were both from, I would say neither one was from upper class circumstances.
Right.
Yeah.
And your dad must have been very smart.
They were both very smart, actually. Right. Yeah, smart in different ways. So they're both, thankfully, you know, highly intelligent people. Yeah. They came to this country, my dad in pursuit of higher education. My mom married my father, came over here to complete her residency. And then eventually she treated patients from the Veterans Administration, the VA in Cincinnati, to older patients in nursing homes in Southwest Ohio. But their journey, which is, I mean, it's amazing. You think about this, like my dad came in the late 70s. And back then, you don't have cell phones, you don't have phone connection, you're in a totally different place, totally different environment. To be able to pack your bags, go around the world and say that we're going to make it in the greatest country known to the history of man takes gumption.
It does.
And so for me, that was part of what I, took away from their story and upbringing is hardship is something that happens to you in life. Victimhood is a choice.
Right.
And we don't choose to be victims.
Yes.
We choose to be victorious. And that was the mentality that my parents instilled in me. My dad had a slogan growing up is if you're going to stand out, you might as well be outstanding. And I think there's something very American about that.
Yeah.
It is the American creed, this idea of pursuing excellence, pursuing and celebrating success. And I think it is what draws so many of the greatest minds from across the world through most of our nation's history.
Yeah.
To this great country we have. I want to preserve that creed
Optimism.
and that optimism and that sense of mobility and success in our country.
An adventure.
An adventure, absolutely. And, you're taking risk.
Yes.
That too is part of the American way, the American culture.
And
Talked about, Ohio even as a frontier. There's people who took risks to go west. You think about people who come to this country to take risks, to participate in the system of creating value. Think about my own success as in the American dream was as an entrepreneur. You take risks. Sometimes you fail, sometimes you succeed, but that is the grit, the texture of the American dream. And that's the spirit that I want to see us revive. And I go back to the education system. I think it is the best place, Miranda, with the next generation to cultivate that American spirit that I think we're longing for in the country.
And did your mother psychoanalyze you at all? I mean, what was it like
Thankfully
to have
not.
a mother who was a shrink?
She found her way. So her specialty was geriatric psychiatry. So she was particularly taking care of
maybe later
patients and when I hopefully God willing we're all alive and doing well and healthy. But
did she give you any sort of strategies for success or for?
I think they had a very simple formula.
Mm-hmm.
When in doubt, work hard. When in doubt, work hard. It's like I told you I'm a tennis fanatic.
Yeah.
It's like a strategy. Best advice I get from a tennis coach is if you feel like you're having an off day on the court, some days your rhythm is off or whatever. What's the best thing you can do is just excess footwork. Just go extra hard on the small steps, put a little extra effort in, and that's usually how you're going to find your rhythm.
Really?
So that's on the tennis court. And it generally works, okay? And so this is, advice a lot of pros would get too.
Fantastic.
That advice writ large to life was probably the best advice that my parents would have given me when I was young too, is when in doubt, work hard at what you want to achieve. And most of the times things are going to work themselves out.
Huh.
Now there's certain areas where you're never going to, different people have different natural gifts. I loved playing basketball as a kid, but I'm 6 feet tall. I was never destined to play in the NBA.
Right.
So there's certain things that, when you hit the outer limits of where your capacities are, that's just the truth. And I've been so blessed in other ways. We have other natural capacities we're able to use.
And tennis, you were amazing. You were a national champion.
Yeah, national champion is an overstatement.
Oh, is it?
I was, I would love to take that and accept that. But I was a good player. Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and when did you start playing? And what?
I played, we played a bunch of sports till I was probably in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. And then it actually was when my dad, so I mentioned the GE, turmoil or whatever under Jack Welch. So he had an ability to keep his job security by going to night school at Northern Kentucky University Law School. And by the way, the idea of the advice they gave me, they practiced what they preached.
Yes.
So he faces job insecurity. What does he do? When in doubt, work a little extra hard. So
and go to law school.
He went to night school for 4 years. So full-time job a day, 4 years, 45-minute plus drive to Northern Kentucky from Cincinnati and back. And by the way, sometimes I would do those drives and be in 6th grade in the back of the law class with him. Got a firsthand experience of what that hard work actually looked like. But anyway, that required my brother, who's 4 years younger than I, we'd have team sports, soccer, basketball. My mom was then single piloting. So we had to consolidate to a place where we could actually play the same sport at the same time.
Oh, I see.
So that was the genesis of tennis.
Right.
Yeah. So my brother started 4 years younger than me playing seriously, and he was like a national champ.
Right.
So he got to be like,
so he's better than you.
Yeah. I hate to admit it in public like this, but I hope he doesn't listen to this, but yes, he is better than me.
Yeah.
And he got, he's 4 years younger and grew up playing with me and people my age.
Yeah.
But that was what created it, was my mom having to, decide we couldn't have 2 soccer games at the same time when my dad is, at night school for law school after work. So we consolidated on tennis, and it worked out for the better. I mean, my brother got really good, and I got, I would say humbly quite good as well.
So firstborn of 2 boys, obviously you're going to be quite an alpha.
I guess.
And you mentioned before that you don't do very well as being number two.
I don't. Yeah.
And with Elon, I guess that must have been part of the mix. I was a bit surprised that was a job that you were given by President Trump after the election.
Mm-hmm.
Were you a bit disappointed that you weren't given a cabinet post?
I was offered a cabinet post.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
Yeah, but
I'll
reserve that between myself and President Trump.
Okay.
There were a couple that were discussed, but for me, what was interesting was one of my.
And you said no, you'd prefer DOGE.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and one of my core things that I ran on for U.S. president, core platform, was taking down the overgrown regulatory state. You think about the fourth branch of government, it is this overgrown bureaucracy. And I've traveled this country, and I travel my home state of Ohio too. You meet a lot of people who would say we have too much red tape. I haven't met one person who say we need a little more red tape in this country. And I do think that is the wet blanket on our economy that's choking the country from its maximal potential. I continue to believe that we're making progress. So for me, when I thought about what I wanted to do and I was already set on running for governor of Ohio, but for a period of time in the administration where I could be most helpful, that's where my focus was. And I continue to believe that is one of the areas where we can unlock real potential. I was really glad to, make what I hope were some useful contributions for 2.5 months of working intensely and setting up DOGE for what I thought was the path it was heading. But, at a certain point, you got to follow your own natural calling. And as I said,
why do you think DOGE turned into a tech? Because, at the beginning, when you wrote that Wall Street Journal piece with Elon Musk, it seemed like more of an outside the government, as you say, sort of a takedown or a shrinking or a reassessment of the bureaucratic state, the administrative state. And yet it just became kind of tech support, as Elon called it. Were you surprised by that? Why did that happen?
Well, I'll leave, Elon took the reins for DOGE and worked with President Trump on that. So I'll leave that to him and others to discuss.
It's been successful up to a point.
Well, from my perspective, we got a few things we got to address in the country, right? So one is we have the overgrown regulatory state. Yeah. That can be addressed through executive power. And then we have an overgrown national debt problem. Yeah. And that needs to be addressed through legislation. So my own perspective is that...
Or growth.
A combination of both. I think at this point, both is required. Those are two sides of the same coin, but it has to still be addressed through legislation that spawns that growth. Mm-hmm. Now, deregulation is part of giving us the tailwind for that growth. So you're right, they do go together. But my view is executive power, a great way to deregulate, cut red tape. President Trump is getting a head start in that direction. I want to see more in that direction at the state level, which is a big part of where I'm focused in Ohio, is cutting red tape.
Yeah.
And then at the federal level, at some point, we're going to have to confront the national debt problem in the country, where it's right now 37 trillion approaching and growing. I think it's on track to be 60, 65 trillion in 10 years because it compounds. Mm. And at some point, we're going to confront that. And I do think that economic growth is an important part of our way out. I also have some, broader perspectives on how we can think about empowering a whole new generation of capitalists in the country. You think about everyone's focused on what do you cut, and how do you roll back entitlements? How about thinking about cultivating a generation of millionaires in this country who are so wealthy that they don't need access to the yesterday's entitlement state, but instead are a generation of millionaires that are independently successful on their own? And what's the key to getting there? You go back to two things, the education system, and then you go back to starting the process of asset compounding at a young age. And Albert Einstein called this the most powerful force in the universe, and he was right. The difference between the wealthy and everybody else is whether or not you own an asset that compounds. That's really the difference between, broadly speaking, the wealthy and everyone else. And so
that's been real estate so far. For most people,
real estate, equity.
Right.
Real estate,
equity,
real estate doesn't, I'm talking about broaden the base of stock market ownership in this country. You think about what the S&P 500 has done in the last 20 years. Imagine if the full base of the United States of America participated in that. We'd be no longer fighting each other tooth and nail. We'd instead be united.
How would you do that?
Well, that's maybe a longer discussion for another time.
But would you give people shares when they're born? Or?
I think that I'll give you the most modest example where I'll start in Ohio.
Yeah.
And I think that there's going to be more ambitious ways that we implement this. But I'll give you the most modest example. Start with education. Financial literacy education, starting at a young age. If you think, if you're a patriotic parent, if you're willing to die for your country, here's something easier you can do that would also do some good for your country. Actually teach your kids how to do math by 8th grade. Actually teach your kids to read by 3rd grade and put $10,000 in the S&P 500 as early as you can.
Right.
Just leave it there. Don't touch it.
Well, President Trump's kind of doing that with that baby bonus.
So I think there's so just say as a parent, right? And $10,000 is nothing to sniff at. I'm not saying that it's easy for every parent to come up with $10,000, but if you're able to save $10,000 and put it in the S&P 500 for your kid, you let that compound. They're going to be a millionaire by the time they're in their 50s.
Doing nothing.
Well, what I would say, if you have a government version of this, attach work requirements and so forth. But that's one of the most patriotic things you could do for your country as a parent right now is teach your kids how to do math, algebra by 8th grade, read by 3rd grade, put $10,000 away in the S&P 500 and set them up to be a millionaire. And to me, if we're able to then root for the economic policies that cause maximal S&P 500 compounding, but everyone's actually participating in it, now we're really talking about a new kind of capitalism in which everyone's participating in uncapped equity upside. And this is where I see the future of our new conservative movement going, or at least where it ought to go, is to revive capitalism, revive success, revive meritocracy, but to do it in a way that allows everyone to participate in the benefits of that gain rather than the us versus themism of penalizing the people who succeed and rallying the people who are falling behind against the people who have succeeded. The us versus them stuff, let that be yesterday. On the left, and frankly, even I would say on the right as well, let's not go the direction of the left. Let's go the direction of how we actually empower people to achieve the things that capitalism empowers them to achieve.
Back to DOGE, what happened with Elon? And were you surprised in the end that he and Donald Trump fell out so badly?
I'll leave that between the two of them. I'm not here a commentator between the relationship between those two guys.
Okay, fair enough.
But what I would say
is,
is,
what about your relationship with Elon? What was he like to work with? Because
smart, obviously, I mean, to say he's a smart guy is obviously
was
a smart
he
guy.
Awake 24/7? Like, what were his?
I mean, it was a good, interesting experience for a couple of months, and I think that we share a passion for fixing some of these foundational issues in the country. There's different ways to do it, and there's, I could say, maybe no right or wrong way.
Yeah.
I had my vision of how to do it, and my perspective is I'll have the opportunity to lead from the front in Ohio, which is why I chose the path that I did. Because a lot of, you think about what we did, what we're looking to do at DOGE, I think I'm actually going to be able to even help implement in my home state. I'll give you one example just to tease something I haven't really talked about elsewhere, but you're kind of pulling it out of me. Is you think about a lot of those regulations at the federal level. And one of the things we were looking at is how do you rescind a lot of those regulations that fell outside of the constitutional scope of Congress's response, or was Congress's responsibility, but were never passed by Congress. So constitutionally are out of scope. They're actually unconstitutional regulations. So we were looking at all kinds of ways to rescind a lot of the regs that the Supreme Court has said are actually unlawful. Well, whether or not that happens at the federal level.
Can't you just axe them?
Well,
can't the president just axe them?
So my view is yes.
Right.
My view is yes.
Yeah.
But that A, needs to happen. And
what
B,
kind of
there's sometimes hoops that you go, I mean, you could
like
think about
fishing regulations.
Every domain, fishing, wildlife, to EPA, to Nuclear Regulatory Commission that's killed nuclear energy production in the country. But there's hoops you have to jump through, or at least arguably so. The Administrative Procedures Act, et cetera. That's a whole separate discussion. One of the things you can do as a state is that you can actually sue the federal government if those regulations are impacting you. And guess what? My first 2 years as governor, if I'm successfully elected, will overlap with President Trump's last 2 years as US president, which is a friendly administration. We have a great relationship, which allows us to be able to actually accomplish maybe things by states pushing for the federal action that's actually easier for the federal government to accomplish that way than to jump through the Administrative Procedures Act. Yeah.
So it's sort of a reverse. You're helping the federal government do what you wanted to do, except you're doing it via
synergistically.
Right.
Synergistically, exactly. So in that way.
So free up energy or whatever it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Energy production. You can think about natural gas. You can think about nuclear. You can think about a lot of other areas too. So that experience of helping with the transition, of being involved, my experience running for US president, really opened up for me opportunities at the intersection of leading as a state, but setting an example for the country I'm excited to implement.
Did you learn things?
I learned an immense amount.
Right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I learned an immense amount.
Yeah.
I mean, how could you not?
Yeah.
I mean, you're drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah.
You're seeing things that you never would have imagined.
What was the most useful thing you learned?
I think that the most useful thing that I learned is that in a business context, right? You set a vision, you've got your own employee base who reports to you. It's hard enough to implement through a large enough rank and file, but at least, you're implementing and you're in charge as a CEO. In the federal government, there are so many, it's like a wedding cake of overlapping different authorities that the good news is if you can move that Titanic even by 2 degrees, the magnitude of effect that you have on the country, hopefully for the better, is huge. The different part is it's really hard to move that Titanic more than just a couple of degrees. And I think President Trump, in his second term, you look at his own learnings from the first term, I think is really a different kind of leader and understanding how to move those levers more effectively than a first-time president.
Frustrating for someone who's been an entrepreneur, who's been successful in business, to come into government. And
I think that one of the things one of the most interesting things that might go down in the history books from President Trump's presidency, this is whether you agree with him or not, right? And I worked hard to get him elected, but this is irrespective of the policy content, is I think it's a cool model to have somebody be a president for 4 years, leave, have the chance to reflect on that experience, really formulate a vision for what you want to accomplish, and then come back. It had only happened once previously in U.S. history, right? With Cleveland, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that it's one of the most interesting parts of watching President Trump's comeback is the ability to have taken those first term experiences and then learned from them.